The morning sun painted golden streaks across the London sky as Kate Middleton stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her elegant blue dress. Today was different from any other day in the royal calendar. Today, the family would step outside the palace walls not for a formal engagement, but for something far more personal and meaningful. William entered the room, already dressed in his casual navy blazer. He smiled at his wife, that same warm smile that had captured hearts around the world years ago. They had discussed this day for weeks, weighing every detail, every possible outcome. The decision to bring their children along on this particular visit had not been made lightly. Downstairs, the sound of excited chatter filled the breakfast room. Prince George sat at the table, his tie slightly crooked, practicing the handshake his father had taught him. Princess Charlotte twirled in her new dress, the fabric catching the light as she moved. Little Prince Louis clutched his favorite toy, his eyes wide with curiosity about where they were going. Kate knelt down to Charlotte's level, gently smoothing her daughter's hair. The princess looked up at her mother with questioning eyes. Kate explained in simple words that a child could understand that they were going to meet some very special people today. People who needed to see that others cared about them, that they were not forgotten. The palace staff moved quietly around them, making final preparations. Security personnel checked their watches and spoke into hidden microphones. Outside, a modest convoy of vehicles waited, far less grand than the usual royal processions. This was intentional. William and Kate wanted this visit to feel genuine, not like a publicity spectacle. As they walked toward the waiting cars, Kate held Louis's hand while William guided George and Charlotte. The children sensed something important was happening, though they couldn't quite understand what. George straightened his shoulders, trying to mirror his father's posture. Charlotte walked with careful steps, mindful of her new shoes. The drive through London took them away from the familiar landmarks and tourist attractions. They passed through neighborhoods where everyday people lived everyday lives. William pointed out the window occasionally, showing the children different parts of the city they rarely saw. Kate watched her husband, admiring how naturally he connected with their children, how he never let his royal duties overshadow his role as a father. Their destination was a children's hospital on the outskirts of the city. Not one of the large, well-known medical centers that often received royal visits, but a smaller facility that served families from struggling communities. The hospital staff had been informed of the visit only days before, barely enough time to prepare. But that was exactly what William and Kate wanted. They didn't want polished presentations or carefully staged photo opportunities. As the cars pulled up to the modest building, Kate felt her heart quicken. She looked at her children, wondering if they truly understood what they were about to witness. William reached over and squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance that they were doing the right thing. The hospital director, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Patricia Hughes, waited at the entrance. Her eyes were tired but hopeful. She had worked at this hospital for 20 years, watching it struggle for funding while caring for some of the city's most vulnerable children. When she received the call about the royal visit, she had hardly believed it. William and Kate stepped out first, then helped their children from the vehicle. George looked around with careful observation, his young mind processing everything. Charlotte gripped her mother's hand a little tighter. Louis pressed close to his father's leg, suddenly shy in the unfamiliar surroundings. Dr. Hughes greeted them warmly, shaking hands with William and Kate before bending down to welcome the children. She spoke to them not as a royal family but as people, as parents who cared, as children who might understand, in their own way, the importance of kindness. Inside the hospital, the hallways were clean but worn. The paint on the walls showed its age. The furniture in the waiting areas had been repaired many times over, yet there was something warm about the place, something that felt like genuine care lived in these corridors. The staff members who passed by smiled softly, their faces showing surprise and quiet joy at the unexpected visitors. William noticed everything: the cracked ceiling tiles, the outdated equipment visible through open doorways, the donation jar at the reception desk that was barely half full. He made mental notes, already thinking about how he might help beyond just this single visit. Kate's attention was drawn to the children's artwork displayed on the walls. Colorful drawings and paintings, some signed with shaky handwriting, others with just a first name and an age. She paused before a picture of a rainbow, painted by a 7-year-old named Emma. The colors were bright and hopeful despite being drawn in a place associated with illness and worry. Dr. Hughes began to lead them down a corridor toward the children's ward. The royal couple had requested to spend time with the young patients, to talk with them and their families, to offer not just a brief appearance but real presence. Charlotte looked up at her mother with questioning eyes, and Kate bent down to whisper words of encouragement, preparing her daughter for what they were about to see. The door to the children's ward stood before them now, and beyond it lay the reason for their visit. Children who faced challenges that George, Charlotte, and Louis could barely imagine. Families carrying burdens that would test anyone's strength. And in a few moments, they would all come together in a way that would touch hearts around the world, though none of them knew it yet. William reached for the door handle, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. What happened next would change not just this day, but would ripple outward in ways no one could have predicted. The royal family was about to learn something profound about compassion, and the world was about to witness a moment of genuine humanity that would be remembered for years to come. The children's ward was quieter than Kate had expected. Soft afternoon light filtered through large windows, casting gentle shadows across the room. About 15 beds lined the walls, some separated by colorful curtains decorated with cartoon characters. Several beds were occupied by children of various ages, some sleeping, others awake and watching television or reading books. A young nurse named Sophie approached them with a warm smile. She had been working this ward for 3 years and had seen many difficult cases, but she never lost her compassion. She explained to William and Kate that most of the children here were dealing with serious long-term illnesses. Some had been in and out of the hospital for months. Others were here for the first time, scared and confused. George held his father's hand tightly as they walked further into the ward. He had never seen anything like this before. Children his own age lying in hospital beds, connected to machines that beeped softly. Some had lost their hair. Others looked pale and tired. For a young prince who had lived a sheltered life, this was an awakening. Charlotte noticed a little girl sitting up in bed near the window. She looked about 5 years old with big brown eyes and a colorful scarf wrapped around her head. The girl was holding a worn stuffed rabbit and staring at the royal family with an expression of wonder. Charlotte tugged on her mother's dress and pointed. Kate guided her daughter toward the girl's bed. The child's name was Amelia, as the chart at the foot of her bed indicated. Her mother sat in a chair beside her, looking exhausted but managing a small smile as the Duchess approached. Kate introduced herself gently, then introduced Charlotte, encouraging her daughter to say hello. Charlotte, usually confident and outgoing, felt suddenly shy. But she remembered what her mother had told her in the car about being kind and making people smile. She stepped forward and offered her hand to Amelia. The sick girl's face lit up with pure joy. She shook Charlotte's hand carefully as if greeting a fairy tale princess come to life. Meanwhile, William and George had stopped at another bed where a 10-year-old boy named Jack was sitting up, reading a book about space. The boy looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. William sat down on the edge of the bed and asked Jack about his book. The boy's initial shock gave way to excitement as he began explaining his favorite planets and his dream of becoming an astronaut someday. George listened intently. Here was a boy not much older than himself who faced each day with courage that George was only beginning to understand. Jack showed George a drawing he had made of a rocket ship, and George studied it with genuine interest, asking questions that made Jack's face glow with pride. Louis, the youngest, had been content to stay close to his mother, but then he noticed a toddler across the room about his age, playing with blocks on a hospital tray. The little boy's name was Thomas, and he had a bandage covering part of his head. Without hesitation, Louis walked over and picked up one of the blocks, offering it to Thomas with a shy smile. Thomas's grandmother, who had been sitting nearby looking worried and tired, felt tears spring to her eyes. In that simple gesture, she saw hope. She saw that her grandson, despite his illness, could still be just a normal child playing with another child. It was a moment of normalcy in a sea of medical procedures and frightening diagnoses. Kate moved from bed to bed, spending time with each family. She didn't rush. She didn't offer empty platitudes or rehearsed sympathies. Instead, she listened. She held hands. She looked into the eyes of frightened parents and let them know through her presence that they were seen and their struggles mattered. One mother broke down in tears while speaking with Kate. Her daughter, Emma, the 7-year-old who had painted the rainbow on the wall, had been fighting leukemia for 2 years. The treatment was grueling, and the family's resources were nearly depleted. Kate sat with this mother for nearly 20 minutes just listening to her story, sharing in her pain without trying to fix what couldn't be easily fixed. William spoke with a father whose teenage son was recovering from a serious surgery. The man confessed that he had been angry at the world, angry at fate for choosing his family to bear this burden. William didn't offer royal wisdom or distant sympathy. Instead, he shared his own fears as a father, his own worry about his children's safety and health. In that moment, Prince and Commoner were just two fathers connecting over shared vulnerability. The hospital staff watched these interactions with growing amazement. They had hosted royal visits before, brief stops where important people smiled for cameras and left quickly. But this was different. William and Kate were fully present, genuinely engaged. And their children, rather than being kept at a safe distance, were learning invaluable lessons about empathy and human connection. Charlotte and Amelia had become fast friends. The princess had climbed carefully onto the edge of Amelia's bed, and the two girls were giggling over Charlotte's description of her pony back at home. Amelia shared that she loved horses too, and hoped that when she got better, she might get to ride one someday. Charlotte promised, with all the seriousness a young child could muster, that she would make sure Amelia got that chance. George and Jack had moved on from space talk to discussing football. Jack revealed he had been a goalkeeper on his school team before getting sick. George's eyes lit up because he too played goalkeeper. William watched his son connect with this brave boy and felt a swell of pride. This was what he wanted for his children, the ability to see beyond privilege and title to the shared humanity in everyone. Dr. Hughes quietly informed Kate that there was one more patient she might want to meet. In a private room at the end of the ward was a teenage girl named Sophia, who had been in the hospital for 6 months. She was 16, dealing with a rare condition that had robbed her of her mobility and much of her independence. She had become depressed, barely speaking to the staff, refusing visitors. Kate asked if Sophia would be willing to see her. Dr. Hughes wasn't sure, but offered to ask. A few minutes later, she returned with a subtle nod. Kate excused herself from the main ward and walked down the corridor to Sophia's room, her heart heavy with anticipation for what she might find. The room was dimly lit, curtains partially drawn. Sophia lay in bed, turned toward the wall. Kate entered quietly, pulled a chair close to the bed, and sat down. She didn't announce herself with grand titles or formal introductions. She simply said hello and asked if she could sit for a while. For several long minutes, Sophia didn't respond. Kate sat in the silence, not uncomfortable with it, just present. Finally, the teenager turned her head slightly. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale and drawn. She looked at Kate with a mixture of surprise and something else, perhaps the faintest glimmer of curiosity. Kate began to talk, softly and honestly. She spoke about her own challenges, about the pressure of public life, about moments of doubt and fear. She didn't compare her struggles to Sophia's illness, but she offered her humanity. She acknowledged that she couldn't understand what Sophia was going through, but she wanted to try to listen if Sophia was willing to share. Slowly, hesitantly, Sophia began to talk. At first just a few words, then more. She spoke about the loss of her normal teenage life, about missing her friends, about feeling like a burden to her parents. Kate listened without judgment, without trying to make it better with false optimism. She simply witnessed Sophia's pain and validated it. By the time Kate emerged from that room 30 minutes later, something had shifted. Sophia had smiled once, a small but genuine smile, when Kate had shared a funny story about Louis's antics at home. It wasn't a miracle cure or a complete transformation, but it was a crack in the wall of despair, and sometimes that's where healing begins. William found his wife in the corridor outside Sophia's room. He could see in Kate's eyes that something profound had happened inside, though she didn't speak of it immediately. Instead, she took his hand and they walked together back toward the main ward where their children were still engaged with the young patients. The scene that greeted them made both parents pause. George was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Jack's bed, both boys examining a collection of football cards that Jack's father had brought from home. Charlotte had somehow convinced 2 other little girls to join her and Amelia, and the 4 of them were singing a song Charlotte had learned at school. Louis was still with Thomas, now building a tower with blocks while Thomas's grandmother watched with tears streaming quietly down her face. Nurse Sophie approached William and Kate with a tablet in her hands. She explained that one of the parents had taken a photo, and it had already begun spreading on social media. Someone had recognized the royal family and shared the image, and now it was being seen by thousands of people. William and Kate exchanged glances. They had known this might happen, though they had hoped for more privacy for the children in the ward. But as Sophie turned the tablet to show them the reactions, they saw something unexpected. The comments weren't about royal fashion or political implications. People were sharing stories of their own experiences with sick children. Others were praising the authentic way William and Kate had engaged with the families. Some were asking how they could help the hospital. The photo had touched something deep in people, a reminder of shared humanity and the importance of compassion. Dr. Hughes joined them, her expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. She explained that the hospital's phone lines were already lighting up with calls from people wanting to make donations. A local news station had called asking if they could run a feature story about the hospital's needs. The royal visit, spontaneous and genuine as it had been, was creating an unexpected wave of support. William felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He asked Dr. Hughes if they could speak privately for a few minutes about the hospital's specific needs. They moved to a small office where the doctor pulled out files and reports detailing the facility's challenges. Outdated equipment, insufficient staff, limited resources for families who couldn't afford care. The list was long and daunting. As they talked, William made notes. He asked specific questions about costs, about partnerships with other organizations, about what would make the most immediate impact. He wasn't making promises he couldn't keep, but he was clearly invested in finding real solutions. Dr. Hughes found herself opening up about her years of frustration, watching children suffer not from lack of medical knowledge but from lack of resources. Meanwhile, back in the ward, Kate had gathered the children for a quiet moment. She knelt down so she was at their eye level and asked them what they thought about the visit. George spoke first, his voice serious beyond his years. He said the children here were brave and that it made him think about how lucky he was. Charlotte nodded enthusiastically, already planning ways she could help, asking if they could bring toys on their next visit. Louis simply said that his new friend Thomas was nice and that he wanted to play with him again. In his innocent, simple way, he had captured the essence of what this visit was about. Not grand gestures or royal duty, but human connection and friendship that transcended circumstances. A young boy from across the ward called out to George, asking if he could come see his drawing. George looked to his mother, who nodded encouragement. The prince walked over and spent the next 10 minutes admiring this child's artwork, asking questions about each picture, making the young patient feel seen and valued. Kate noticed a mother sitting alone by the window, watching the scene with tears in her eyes. She approached the woman gently and sat beside her. The mother explained that her son was in surgery at that moment, a risky procedure that might determine whether he would walk again. She had been sitting in this spot for hours, paralyzed by fear and hope. Kate didn't offer false assurances or royal platitudes. She simply sat with this mother in her fear. She held her hand. She shared that she too knew what it felt like to worry about her children's well-being, though she acknowledged her circumstances were vastly different. The mother seemed to draw strength from this presence, from knowing that in this moment, she wasn't alone in her vigil. William rejoined his family, having spent nearly an hour with Dr. Hughes discussing practical steps forward. He found Kate still sitting with the worried mother, and he pulled up another chair. The three of them sat together in companionable silence, waiting for news about the surgery. When a surgeon finally appeared with a cautious but hopeful smile, reporting that the procedure had gone well, William and Kate celebrated with this mother as if the good news were their own. The afternoon was wearing on. The royal family had been at the hospital for nearly 4 hours, far longer than originally planned. Security personnel were getting anxious, concerned about the growing crowd gathering outside as word spread about the royal presence. But William and Kate were reluctant to leave, sensing that their time here was important in ways that couldn't be measured. They decided it was time to go, but not before making sure they had connected with every family in the ward. They moved through the room one last time, saying proper goodbyes, exchanging hugs where appropriate, offering words of encouragement. Charlotte made Amelia promise to keep in touch, and Kate wrote down her office's contact information, assuring Amelia's mother that they genuinely wanted to know how her daughter progressed. George gave Jack his favorite football card, a gesture that made the sick boy's eyes well up with tears. It wasn't valuable in monetary terms, but the meaning behind it was priceless. William watched his son learn generosity in real time, giving away something he treasured to bring joy to someone who needed it more. Louis hugged Thomas goodbye, and the two toddlers seemed oblivious to the significance of the moment. They were just two small children who had played together on an ordinary afternoon. But to Thomas's grandmother it was everything. It was a reminder that her grandson was still just a child, deserving of joy and friendship despite his medical challenges. As the royal family prepared to leave, the hospital staff lined up to shake their hands and thank them. But it was William and Kate who did most of the thanking, expressing genuine appreciation for the incredible work these doctors and nurses did every day, without recognition or fanfare. They were the real heroes, and the royal couple made sure they knew it. Dr. Hughes walked them to the entrance, her earlier professional composure completely dissolved. She thanked them repeatedly, her voice thick with emotion. William assured her that this was not just a single visit, but the beginning of a partnership. He promised to follow up within days with concrete plans for support. Outside, the crowd had grown to several hundred people. Word had spread through social media, and people had come hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. But the mood wasn't one of celebrity worship. People held signs thanking the family for drawing attention to children's health care. Others held donation envelopes for the hospital. The visit had sparked something in the community, a reminder of what truly mattered. As William and Kate loaded their tired children into the waiting vehicles, Charlotte looked back at the hospital building and asked when they could return. Kate promised they would come back soon, and this time she meant it. This wasn't a royal obligation being checked off a list. This had become personal. The drive back through London was quiet. The children were processing what they had experienced. William and Kate sat hand in hand, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed and what they might do to help. The weight of their privilege had never felt heavier, but also more purposeful. By the time the royal family returned to the palace, the world had caught fire with their story. News outlets across the globe were running features about the visit. The images that had been shared on social media had been viewed millions of times. But what captured hearts wasn't the glamour or spectacle. It was the genuine humanity displayed in every photograph and video clip. One image in particular had gone viral. It showed Princess Charlotte sitting on the edge of Amelia's hospital bed, both girls holding hands and smiling at each other. The photograph captured something pure and unscripted, a moment of real connection between two children whose lives were worlds apart, yet brought together by simple kindness. Another widely shared clip showed Prince George giving Jack his football card. The video, taken by Jack's father on his phone, showed George's earnest expression as he explained why he wanted Jack to have it. Jack's emotional reaction, the way his face crumbled with gratitude before breaking into a huge smile, had moved people to tears around the world. Kate sat in her private study that evening. Scrolling through the responses flooding social media, she rarely paid much attention to public reaction, having learned long ago that trying to please everyone was impossible. But these responses were different. People weren't critiquing her outfit or analyzing her body language. They were sharing their own stories of sick children, of struggles with healthcare systems, of the need for more compassion in the world. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from a mother in Australia whose daughter had battled cancer for 3 years. She wrote that seeing the royal family treat sick children with such genuine care had given her hope. Not hope that her daughter's illness would magically disappear, but hope that people still cared about each other. That kindness still existed in high places. William joined Kate in the study carrying 2 cups of tea. He sat beside his wife and they read through messages together. Some were from world leaders praising their compassion. Others were from ordinary citizens offering to volunteer at hospitals or donate to children's healthcare charities. Several hospitals had reported receiving unprecedented amounts of donations in just the few hours since news of the visit broke. But amidst all the positive response, there were criticisms too. Some accused them of using sick children for publicity. Others questioned whether a single visit really made any difference when systemic healthcare problems needed addressing. A few cynical voices suggested the whole thing had been a calculated PR move to improve their public image. William felt his jaw tighten reading some of these comments. Kate placed a hand on his arm and reminded him that they couldn't control how people interpreted their actions. They had gone to that hospital with genuine intentions. Their children had learned valuable lessons and real good was coming from the attention. The rest was just noise. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. George entered, still in his pajamas, ready for bed. He asked if Jack would really get better, if the football card might somehow help him heal. William pulled his son onto his lap and explained that medicine would help Jack's body heal, but kindness helped heal people's spirits. The card was a way of showing Jack that someone cared about him, that he wasn't alone in his fight. George seemed to consider this carefully. Then he asked if they could send more things to the hospital, maybe books or toys for the other children. William and Kate exchanged glances, proud of their son's growing understanding of generosity. They promised to help him organize donations and assured him they would return to visit the children again soon. After George had been tucked into bed, William returned to his own laptop where he had been drafting emails all evening. He had already reached out to several healthcare charities, proposing partnerships focused on pediatric care. He had contacted business leaders he knew, asking them to consider supporting children's hospitals. He had even reached out to government officials to discuss policy changes that could improve access to care. Kate, meanwhile, was coordinating with her staff about follow-up visits. She had already decided they would return to the hospital in 2 weeks, this time bringing the donations George wanted to contribute. But she also wanted to visit other children's hospitals around the country, to shine a light on the incredible work being done in facilities that often operated on shoestring budgets. The next morning brought fresh developments. Several major corporations announced they were making substantial donations to children's hospitals across the United Kingdom. One tech company pledged to donate state-of-the-art medical equipment to 10 underfunded facilities. A pharmaceutical company announced a grant program to help families cover the cost of expensive treatments. While the royal family couldn't take direct credit for these donations, the timing suggested their visit had been a catalyst. By using their platform to highlight the needs of sick children, they had inadvertently sparked a movement of generosity. People wanted to help. They just needed to be reminded of where help was needed most. Charlotte bounced into the breakfast room that morning with a folder full of drawings she had made. She explained that she wanted to send them to Amelia and the other children at the hospital to brighten up their rooms. Kate helped her daughter write little notes on each drawing, simple messages of encouragement and friendship. Louis, not to be left out, had collected several of his toys to give to Thomas. Kate gently explained that while his generous heart was beautiful, Thomas might not be at the hospital much longer and might prefer new toys of his own. Instead, she suggested they could pick out new toys together, specifically for children at the hospital. Louis agreed enthusiastically, already planning what he would choose. William spent the morning on phone calls, speaking with Dr. Hughes about the overwhelming response the hospital had received. She reported that the donation lines hadn't stopped ringing. They had received enough funds in one day to purchase equipment they had been trying to afford for years. More importantly, several families who had been struggling to pay for their children's treatments had received anonymous donations covering their costs. But Dr. Hughes also shared something that moved William deeply. She said that the emotional impact on the children in the ward had been profound. Little Amelia, who had been withdrawn and sad for weeks, had been talking nonstop about Princess Charlotte's visit. Jack had shown his football card to everyone, his spirits visibly lifted. Even Sophia, the depressed teenager, had asked her parents to arrange for her to get some books, saying that if the Duchess could take time to sit with her, the least she could do was try to engage with life again. This reminded William and Kate why they had made the visit in the first place. Yes, the monetary donations and policy discussions were important, but the real impact was in those individual moments of connection, in showing children fighting difficult battles that they were seen, valued, and not forgotten. A formal letter arrived from Amelia's mother that afternoon. Written in careful handwriting, she expressed gratitude that went beyond words. She explained that Amelia had been losing hope, that the treatments were so difficult and the progress so slow. But after meeting Charlotte, something had shifted in her daughter. Amelia had started fighting harder, smiling more, believing that good things could still happen. The mother wrote that she didn't care about royal titles or wealth. What mattered was that Kate had treated her daughter like she mattered, like she was worth spending time with. Kate read this letter alone in her study and wept. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. The criticism, the pressure, the constant scrutiny all faded away when faced with the reality that their actions had genuinely helped a suffering child find hope. That evening, the family gathered for dinner as they always did, a private time away from duties and obligations. The children chattered about their day while William and Kate listened, occasionally exchanging knowing glances. Their life was extraordinary in many ways, filled with privilege and opportunity that most people could never imagine. But in this moment, they were just a family sharing a meal and talking about their day. George mentioned that he wanted to learn more about what doctors do, wondering if he might want to help sick people when he grew up. Charlotte announced her plan to become a horse riding teacher specifically for children who were sick, so they could have fun while getting better. Louis just wanted to know when they could go back to play with the children at the hospital. William looked at his children and felt a surge of pride mixed with responsibility. They were learning at such young ages that their privilege came with a duty to help others. Not because they had to, but because they genuinely wanted to. That was the greatest lesson he and Kate could teach them. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. William and Kate had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating with charities, meeting with healthcare officials, and planning their return visit to the hospital. But they had kept their promise to the children that this would not be their last visit. Today they would return, and this time they were bringing more than just their presence. The family car was packed with bags and boxes. George had organized a collection drive at his school, and his classmates had contributed books, toys, and games. Charlotte had worked with Kate to create care packages for each child in the ward, personalized with handwritten notes. Louis had insisted on bringing a mountain of toy cars, declaring that every sick child needed something fun to play with. As they approached the hospital, they noticed something different. The building's exterior had been freshly painted. New signs had been installed. The parking lot was fuller than before, with several news vans positioned at a respectful distance. Dr. Hughes had warned them that media interest remained high, but William had made it clear that the focus should remain on the children, not on creating photo opportunities. Inside, the hospital felt transformed. The waiting area had new furniture. Fresh paint brightened the hallways. But more than the physical changes, there was an energy in the air, a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. Staff members smiled more readily. Parents in the waiting room looked less burdened, though their worries remained real. Dr. Hughes greeted them with a smile that reached her eyes. She explained that the donations they had received were being put to immediate use. New medical equipment had been ordered. They had hired additional nursing staff. Most importantly, they had established a fund to help families who couldn't afford treatment costs. The impact of that single visit 2 weeks ago was already changing lives. The royal family made their way to the children's ward, arms full of donations. As they entered, a cheer went up from the children who were awake and alert. Amelia was sitting up in bed, looking much stronger than before. Her mother stood beside her, tears already forming in her eyes as she saw Princess Charlotte rushing toward them. Charlotte climbed carefully onto Amelia's bed, just as she had during their first visit. The two girls hugged like old friends reunited after a long separation. Charlotte pulled out a special gift she had wrapped herself, a beautiful picture book about horses. She had written a message inside the front cover, promising Amelia that when she got better, they would go riding together. Amelia's eyes sparkled with joy and determination. She told Charlotte that she had been trying extra hard with her treatments, that she wanted to get better so they could keep their promise. Her mother watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and awe, unable to quite believe that a princess genuinely cared about her daughter's recovery. George sought out Jack immediately. The young boy was out of bed now, sitting in a chair by the window. His condition had improved significantly over the past 2 weeks. He proudly showed George that he still had the football card, kept safe in a protective sleeve. George had brought him more cards, but also something else, a signed football from one of Jack's favorite players that William had managed to secure. Jack's reaction was explosive joy. He couldn't believe it was real. kept touching the ball gently as if it might disappear. His father stood nearby, watching his son experience pure happiness despite their ongoing medical struggles. He approached William to express his thanks but found himself unable to speak past the lump in his throat. William simply clasped his shoulder in understanding, two fathers sharing a moment of connection. Louis bounded over to where Thomas was playing with a new set of blocks that had been donated to the hospital. The two toddlers picked up their friendship as if no time had passed at all. Thomas's grandmother watched them play, remarking to Kate that this normalcy was precious beyond measure. Her grandson had been so focused on his illness, so defined by his medical condition, but when he played with Louis, he was just a little boy having fun. Kate moved through the ward systematically, making sure to spend time with each family. She had studied the files Dr. Hughes provided, learning each child's name, condition, and story. She didn't want anyone to feel overlooked or less important. Every child here was fighting their own battle and deserved to be seen. She found Sophia, the teenage girl she had connected with during the first visit, sitting in a wheelchair near the nurse's station. The transformation in her was remarkable. While she was still dealing with significant physical limitations, her spirit seemed lighter. She smiled when she saw Kate approaching, a genuine smile that hadn't been there before. Sophia explained that after their conversation, she had started working with a therapist and had begun to accept her situation, while still fighting to improve. She showed Kate a journal she had started keeping, writing about her experiences and feelings. Kate sat with her for over half an hour, just talking like two people sharing their thoughts. No pretense of royal protocol or formal interaction. William had requested a meeting with the hospital board of directors and major donors who had contributed following their first visit. In a small conference room, he addressed a group of business leaders, healthcare professionals, and philanthropists. He spoke not with royal authority but with genuine passion about the needs he had witnessed and the opportunity they all had to make lasting change. He shared specific stories, with permission from the families, about children whose lives hung in the balance not because medicine couldn't help them, but because resources were insufficient. He talked about families forced to choose between paying for treatment and keeping their homes. He discussed the incredible staff who worked tirelessly despite inadequate equipment and support. His words were powerful because they came from genuine experience and witnessed truth. By the end of the meeting, new commitments had been made. A consortium of businesses agreed to establish an ongoing funding partnership with the hospital. A major foundation pledged to replicate this model at other underfunded children's hospitals across the country. What had started as a single compassionate visit was evolving into a sustained movement for change. Back in the ward, Charlotte and Amelia had been joined by two other little girls. The four of them were doing arts and crafts together, creating colorful pictures to decorate the ward walls. Charlotte was in her element, leading the activity with enthusiasm while making sure every girl felt included and valued. Kate watched her daughter, seeing the empathy and leadership qualities already emerging. George and Jack had gathered several other boys around them, and an impromptu storytelling session had begun. Jack was sharing tales of his football exploits before getting sick, while George talked about life at school and his own sports experiences. The boys laughed and joked, and for a precious hour, illness and worry faded into the background. A young nurse pulled Kate aside to share something touching. She explained that since the royal family's first visit, the entire atmosphere of the ward had shifted. The children had something to look forward to, stories to tell, hope to hold on to. Even children who hadn't met the royal family directly had been lifted by the overall mood improvement. Hope, she said, was sometimes the best medicine. As the afternoon progressed, William and Kate found themselves doing something unexpected. They had planned to stay for 2 hours, but now 3 hours had passed and they showed no signs of leaving. They were too engaged, too connected to what was happening here. Their security team exchanged glances but said nothing, understanding that this was important. Dr. Hughes approached them hesitantly, not wanting to interrupt, but needing to inform them that dinner would soon be served to the patients. William and Kate looked at each other, then at their children who were still happily engaged with the young patients. Without discussion, they made a decision. They asked if it would be possible for them to stay and share dinner with the children and families. The request caught everyone off guard. This wasn't protocol. This went far beyond a standard royal visit. But Dr. Hughes quickly organized it, and soon the royal family was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, alongside patients and their families, sharing a simple meal of sandwiches and soup. George sat next to Jack, teaching him a card game. Charlotte sat between Amelia and another little girl, all three giggling over some private joke. Louis was in his element, entertaining Thomas and several other toddlers with silly faces and sounds. William and Kate sat at a table with several parents, talking about everyday struggles and hopes, finding common ground despite their vastly different circumstances. A mother across the table from Kate began to cry, overwhelmed by the normalcy of the moment. She explained that for months every meal in this hospital had been heavy with fear and sorrow. But tonight, sitting here with her sick son eating dinner alongside a prince and princess, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like maybe everything would be okay. Not because their problems had vanished, but because they weren't alone in facing them. As evening settled over the hospital and the royal family finally prepared to leave, there was a palpable sense that something significant had occurred. This hadn't been a royal duty fulfilled or a public relations success. This had been a genuine human connection, multiplied a crow. 3 months after that first hospital visit, the world had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. The royal family's compassionate engagement with sick children had sparked something larger than anyone could have anticipated. Children's hospitals across the United Kingdom and beyond had received unprecedented support. More importantly, conversations about pediatric healthcare had moved from the margins to mainstream attention. William stood in his office, reviewing reports from various charitable organizations. The numbers were impressive. Donations to children's hospitals had increased by hundreds of percentage points. Volunteer applications at pediatric facilities had surged. Several countries had announced new policies to improve access to children's health care. But beyond the statistics, it was the individual stories that truly mattered. He opened an email from Jack's father. The young football enthusiast was in remission. His doctors were cautiously optimistic about his long-term prognosis. But what struck William most was a photograph attached to the email. It showed Jack back on the football field wearing his goalkeeper gloves, that huge smile on his face. The boy who had been confined to a hospital bed was playing sports again, living his life again. Kate received a letter that same morning, this one from Amelia's mother. The little girl had completed her treatment cycle and was showing remarkable improvement. But more than that, she was thriving emotionally. The connection she had made with Princess Charlotte had given her something to fight for, a promise to keep. The letter included a drawing Amelia had made, showing 2 girls on horses, their friendship transcending the boundaries of illness and circumstance. Charlotte kept that drawing on her bedroom wall, a daily reminder of her friend who was still fighting to get better. The young princess had been changed by her experience at the hospital. She no longer took her health and privileges for granted. She had begun asking more questions about how she could help others, showing an awareness of the world beyond palace walls that was remarkable for her age. George had become something of an advocate among his peers. He talked openly about his visits to the hospital, about the brave children he had met. Several of his classmates had been inspired to organize their own charitable efforts. One had started a toy drive for sick children. Another had raised money for medical research. George's genuine enthusiasm and heartfelt stories had created a ripple effect among young people who might otherwise have remained unaware of these issues. Even little Louis, in his simple way, had been impacted. He often talked about Thomas, asking when they could play together again. His innocent questions had led to an ongoing relationship between the two families. Thomas had been well enough to visit the palace for a playdate, an afternoon that had been magical for both boys and healing for Thomas's family, who had been carrying such heavy burdens. The royal family had made several more visits to children's hospitals since that first memorable day. Each visit brought new connections, new stories, new opportunities to make a difference. But they had been careful not to let it become routine or performative. Every visit was approached with genuine care and preparation. They learned names, remembered stories, followed up on individual cases. Dr. Hughes had become something of a regular correspondent with William and Kate. She kept them updated on the children they had met and on the hospital's progress. The facility had been transformed not just physically but culturally. Staff morale had improved dramatically. Patient outcomes were better. Families felt more supported. The hospital had become a model for how compassionate care combined with adequate resources could create healing environments. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the royal family returned once more to the hospital. This time they were there for a special celebration. Amelia was being discharged after her final treatment. She was going home, and against all odds, she was going to be okay. The ward had been decorated for the occasion. Balloons and streamers brightened every corner. Many of the families they had met over the past months had returned for this celebration. Jack was there with his parents, healthy and strong. Sophia was there in her wheelchair, still dealing with challenges, but with a light in her eyes that had been absent before. Thomas and his grandmother had come, the little boy having completed his own treatment successfully. When the royal family arrived, they were greeted not as dignitaries, but as friends. There were hugs and tears, laughter and joy. This gathering wasn't about royal protocol or formal ceremonies. It was about celebrating victory over illness, about honoring courage, about recognizing that human connection could be powerful medicine. Charlotte and Amelia held hands as they walked through the ward together, Amelia showing her friend the artwork on the walls, pointing out which pictures were hers. The promise Charlotte had made months ago about riding horses together was about to be kept. Arrangements had been made for Amelia to visit a stable near her home, where she would have her first riding lesson. Charlotte would be there, fulfilling a commitment that had given Amelia something to fight for during her darkest days. William found himself in conversation with several fathers, men who had watched their children suffer, and who had found unexpected solidarity with a prince who proved to be, above all else, just another worried dad. They talked about their experiences, about lessons learned, about gratitude for health and life. The barriers of class and privilege seemed to dissolve in these honest exchanges. Kate spent time with mothers who had become something like friends over these months. They shared updates about their children, about the challenges of recovery, about the trauma that lingered even after illness had been conquered. These women had taught Kate so much about strength and resilience, about what truly mattered in life. She had come to these hospitals thinking she would give something to these families, but she had received far more than she could have imagined. As the celebration continued, Dr. Hughes stood and addressed the gathered crowd. She spoke about the remarkable journey of the past few months, about how a single visit had catalyzed so much positive change. But she emphasized that the real heroes were the children who fought every day, the families who never gave up, the medical staff who dedicated their lives to healing others. Then she did something unexpected. She presented awards to several people in the room. One went to Amelia for her courage and determination. Another went to Jack's father, who had become a volunteer advocate for other families navigating the healthcare system. A third went to Sophia, who had turned her experience into a blog that was helping other teenagers dealing with serious illness. But the final award, Dr. Hughes said, belonged to the royal family. Not for their wealth or status, but for their genuine humanity. For showing up not once, but repeatedly. For treating sick children not as photo opportunities, but as valued individuals. For using their platform not for self-promotion, but to shine light where it was desperately needed. For teaching their own children that privilege came with responsibility, and that true nobility was measured in compassion. William and Kate accepted the simple plaque with humility. William spoke briefly, his voice thick with emotion. He said that they were the ones who had learned from these children and families. That meeting such courageous young people had changed their perspective on what mattered in life. That their own children had been given gifts of empathy and awareness that no amount of formal education could provide. As the afternoon drew to a close and it came time to say goodbye to Amelia, there were tears but also immense joy. Charlotte and Amelia hugged tightly, making plans for their upcoming horse-riding adventure. The two girls from such different worlds had formed a bond that would last far beyond childhood. They had taught each other about friendship, about hope, about seeing past circumstances to the person underneath. On the drive back to the palace, the royal family was quiet, each lost in their own reflections. George stared out the window, thinking about Jack and all the other children fighting battles most kids never had to face. Charlotte held a card Amelia had given her, promising to treasure it always. Louis had fallen asleep, exhausted from playing with Thomas and the other children. William reached for Kate's hand. They didn't need to speak to understand what they were both feeling: gratitude for their children's health, humility at the strength they had witnessed in others. determination to continue using their position to make a real difference, and hope that the seeds of compassion they were planting in their own children would grow into something beautiful. That evening, as Kate tucked Charlotte into bed, her daughter asked if they could visit the hospital again soon. Kate promised they would, explaining that helping others wasn't something you did once and then forgot about. It was an ongoing commitment, a way of living that honored the privileges they had been given. Charlotte nodded seriously, then asked if Amelia would really get to be okay now. Kate sat on the edge of the bed and chose her words carefully. She explained that Amelia had beaten her illness this time, but that life was fragile and uncertain for everyone. What mattered most wasn't that they could make everything perfect, but that they showed up for people that they cared, that they tried to help however they could. The young princess seemed to understand. She snuggled under her blankets, clutching the card from Amelia.